Again, let me repeat that. Group 1, the governor of South Africa to come forward. South Africa. Yes, over there. Right. And group 2, the governor from Gabon. It's over there. Yeah, you can sit over there. I'll call you. I'll call you somewhere else. Group 3, Germany, and Group 4, Morocco. Please come forward. I think we can get started. Obviously, we're not going to go back to the discussion that have taken place in the groups. So therefore, I'm going to ask each rapporteur, based on the discussion that took place, what are the 3 things that like to transpire from your discussion that you'd like to share with the rest of the group, and starting with South Africa for Group 1.
Thank you very much. There were 10 things, but let's see how I can reduce it to 3. The first clearly is that we need to define what we mean and get a common understanding of the words structural transformation. And we had a brief discussion on that, but what emerged was the importance of political and other forms of leadership within a society, a clear vision, the political will to ensure changes are both thought about, but more importantly implemented, the importance of transparency and governance, respect for a Bill of Rights and for different types of freedoms within a society, and creating the conditions by ensuring that we have a clear legal framework or constitution, good codes of governance within society, and institutions that are resilient, such as parliaments and auditors general, which will ensure continuity. So that's the first point. Secondly, in terms of structural change, economic, in terms of the economy, clearly issues like local content, diversification, value addition, better use of our agricultural resources, a change in our procurement laws so that we get better deals, better negotiations with investors so that we get better returns for the resources that we have, and generally more transparency and incentives for the right kind of activity. A point linked to that is the element of inclusivity. Who gets the benefit of the rent that is extracted from investment in the resources in our society? And how do we ensure that we create a tax base within each of our countries and invest, and this is our third point, social investment. Investment in education and health, investment in training, investment in creating a culture of good governance from children of a very young age, investment in gender equality, in youth and their development, and in disabled people so that they also have a share. But above all, ensure that we spend our revenue in a way in which there's an effective social wage that we commit ourselves to. Thank you.
On that note, I'd like to ask the representative from Gabon to speak on behalf of Group 2. And again, take us through within 3 minutes the main issues that came out from your discussion.
Merci, Monsieur le modérateur. Je vais parler français. Donc, pour ceux qui ont besoin d'écouteurs, je vous laisse 3 secondes pour les mettre. Donc, dans le groupe 2, pour ce qui concerne les obstacles à la transformation des économies africaines, nous avons identifié plusieurs obstacles. Les principaux sont notamment le déficit en matière d'infrastructure. Ce matin, nous avons abondamment débattu, mais je crois que c'est un constat qui est fait depuis des années. Nous avons un grand déficit en matière d'infrastructure. Nous avons également un déficit, au moins pour certains pays, en termes de capital humain. Pour développer le pays, pour transformer le pays, on a besoin d'hommes et de femmes bien formés, en bonne santé, pour pouvoir travailler, avoir une productivité correcte. Nous avons noté également un déficit en termes de gouvernance. Alors, même si on a beaucoup de richesses, même si on a beaucoup d'argent, si cet argent est mal géré, on n'aura pas les résultats escomptés. On ne pourra pas transformer l'Afrique. Donc il nous faut une gouvernance qui soit améliorée pour espérer transformer nos économies africaines. Nous avons aussi noté qu'il y a d'énormes besoins financiers qui ne sont pas satisfaits au niveau de l'Afrique. Et pour cela, nous espérons que la Banque africaine de développement va mettre en place les mécanismes qu'il faut pour pouvoir trouver des financements pour nous permettre de transformer notre très chère Afrique. Nous avons noté également un déficit de compétences dans le domaine juridique. Il y a des contrats qui sont négociés avec nos partenaires venus généralement d'autres continents et souvent on note des faiblesses juridiques de notre côté qui concèdent un peu trop d'avantages à nos partenaires. Et parfois, lorsqu'on se rend compte par la suite qu'on a laissé passer une disposition qu'on n'aurait pas dû, à ce moment il devient difficile de négocier, notamment avec nos amis venus d'Asie. Lorsqu'on se rend compte qu'il y a des faiblesses dans un contrat, il est toujours compliqué de renégocier, qu'ils acceptent de renégocier le contrat. Il y a également les déséquilibres macroéconomiques qui sont souvent un frein à la transformation structurelle de nos économies. On constate encore quelques déséquilibres macroéconomiques dans certains pays. Alors, pour ce qui est de ressources naturelles, nous avons pensé, encore une fois, qu'il fallait un cadre juridique bien indiqué pour pouvoir permettre à l'Afrique de bénéficier des revenus de ces ressources naturelles. Parce que le fait que ces cadres juridiques ne soient pas bien ficelés est malheureusement source de corruption et donc de déperdition d'une partie des ressources issues de nos matières premières. Et pour l'utilisation de ces ressources, nous pensons qu'il faut les mettre en priorité dans les infrastructures. Comme on le disait tout à l'heure, nous avons un gros déficit d'infrastructures et donc les pays africains devraient, de manière prioritaire, utiliser ces ressources pour financer les infrastructures, notamment les infrastructures routières, les infrastructures portuaires, les infrastructures dans le domaine de l'énergie, dans le domaine de télécommunications. Toutes ces infrastructures sont nécessaires pour pouvoir transformer l'Afrique. Et nous avons, dans le groupe, pensé que lorsqu'il y a des excédents, qu'on pourrait créer des fonds pour économiser et attendre, disons, lorsqu'il y a des difficultés financières, pour pouvoir utiliser ces ressources. Donc voilà de manière sommaire, Monsieur le modérateur, les quelques idées qui ont émergé dans le groupe 2 sur la transformation des économies africaines et l'utilisation des ressources issues des ressources naturelles. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Let's now stay on the same track and ask the Governor of Germany to tell us what came out of your session, which is Group 3.
Ladies and gentlemen, many of the big points we were discussing have been touched upon, so I can quickly go through my list and point out how important it is in the process of transition. There is, well, the African states won't have that long time period for transition as the old, so-called old countries used to have, but you've got the huge variety of technologies, of knowledge to make use of it. We found that inclusiveness is very important. Inclusiveness in terms of how to include the civil society in the process, and also parliaments, by using information, but information that can be understood. So to build up capacities in form of data and IT systems is important. And we discussed the question of capacity building. How can we, and that was one big point, capacity building within governments, how can we do that? And we found out that, for example, World Bank the African Development Bank, donor partners around the world could help in order to build up this capacity. We need legal support by experts, and again, those multilateral institutions will provide these legal supports. And it's a question of how can we invite private investment into those countries. And I think, and we thought that, for example, PPP projects, public-private partnership projects are important. Also, the rule of law is important, good governance, leadership. And regarding natural resources, it is absolutely important to find really transparent ways of dealing with natural resources, and also not just using them up, but having in mind at the same time the effectiveness, how to use the resources in an effective way, how to protect the environment at the same time so that pollution is being avoided, how to build up social systems and health systems, but also how to invite core labor standards is very important. And of course we did say education is most important. The basic education, but also vocational training, and the whole line-up until very high quality education in universities to train people to deal with their future and to build up the capacities that are needed in the different countries. And also we discussed how to build up value chains. It is absolutely important not just to extract the natural resources, but to try and process them and sell high-quality products. That is also important. And we discussed the sovereign wealth funds, how to deal with them. And we found that institution building is very important in order to deal with that type of fund. And all in all, we think that transparency, accountability, and the inclusiveness, those are wonderful requirements, and of course, investments in human capital.
And last but not least, I'd like to ask the Minister of Finance of Morocco, our host, to take us to the highlights of his session as well.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je pense que beaucoup de points ont été également soulevés par mes collègues, donc je vais essayer d'aller vers l'essentiel pour dire que concernant donc comment réaliser la transformation structurelle de nos économies, l'accent a été mis dans le cadre des discussions sur le besoin d'accélérer en fait l'investissement en infrastructure tout en rentabilisant ces investissements, d'aller dans une logique de ciblage au niveau des politiques économiques sectorielles pour identifier les métiers mondiaux donc des pays et pour véritablement pouvoir nous placer dans le cadre de secteurs plus compétitifs, assurer une croissance inclusive, et donc l'accent a été mis sur le besoin également de faire une attention particulière pour les femmes, pour mieux les inclure dans le développement. Il a été également question d'assurer cette transformation structurelle à travers, je dirais, le développement de la croissance verte avec les énergies renouvelables notamment et l'environnement. Et tout ça passe nécessairement par l'appui au secteur privé, notamment aux petites et moyennes entreprises, et le renforcement et le changement du rôle de l'État pour un État plus stratège, un État accompagnateur et une meilleure gouvernance. Concernant les défis majeurs, donc bien sûr l'aspect infrastructure est venu en tête comme étant une des problématiques majeures. Deuxième grande problématique, c'est celle de la formation et de l'adéquation de la formation aux besoins donc des différents secteurs. Le troisième grand problème, c'est comment assurer une meilleure répartition, je dirais, donc des richesses, que ce soit au niveau social ou au niveau des différentes régions. Et le dernier point qui est revenu, c'est la problématique du brain drain, c'est-à-dire en fait la fuite des cerveaux, qui constitue un handicap pour un certain nombre de pays. Concernant en fait le point relatif au lien entre l'extraction des ressources en général et comment mieux utiliser les ressources naturelles. Donc là aussi, 3 axes fondamentaux ont été arrêtés. Le premier axe, le besoin véritable de mieux négocier les contrats et donc d'avoir une assistance juridique de la part de la Banque africaine de développement pour pouvoir réaliser cela. Le deuxième axe, qui est un élément essentiel, c'est de nous inscrire dans une logique de PPP, mais un PPP qui soit mieux négocié pour pouvoir veiller à être dans une logique de gagnant-gagnant et d'avoir une meilleure intégration et également faire en sorte à ce que les pays, les entreprises de la région puissent participer à ce PPP pour qu'ils gagnent en savoir-faire, pour qu'ils puissent prendre le relais plus tard. Le troisième point, qui est revenu très fort en la matière, c'est celui du besoin aussi de mettre en place, à l'instar d'un certain nombre de pays, un fonds géré démocratiquement des surplus dégagés de ces ressources naturelles qui permettraient d'assurer en fait l'intérêt des générations futures.
Thank you very much. I'm reminded that we don't have a lot of time before the next session, but I'm sure we have 1 or 2 questions or comments from the audience to not only our rapporteur here on stage, but also any addition that may come out from the group that may have been missed. So the floor is open for just a few questions or comments, but very rapidly before we move to the next session. So I guess that takes it that the rapporteur were extremely clear, so therefore no questions or comments from the audience. On that note, I'd like to then thank our rapporteur for being very detailed and expert in terms of what came out from the session, but thank you very much for your contribution. Now I'd like to invite Charles Barnett, the Vice President of Finance, come forward, because we're going to move directly to the next session, which is about the African Infrastructure Fund, which is quite timely because the word infrastructure came out in most of the discussion we had earlier as one of the challenges. So Charles, wherever you are, if you can come forward. As I mentioned earlier, you may have noticed that in most of the discussion, the word infrastructure and infrastructure financing came up as a major challenge for transformation in Africa. So as indicated, how timely that the next session is about infrastructure financing. I leave it to Charles, the Vice President of Finance, to take us through how he's going to organize his presentation, and obviously we'll have room for questions and comment. Charles, the floor is yours.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Sheikh. Good afternoon. Honorable governors, members of the board of directors of the bank, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I would like to share with you, indeed, zoom in on one of the, indeed, I would even say the biggest obstacle to structural transformation that you've been discussing. And just sitting back there listening to the comments, that's one obstacle kept coming up repeatedly. So this is very timely and just a wonderful transition to this topic. Of course, you all know I'm talking about the infrastructure deficit on the continent. Before we get into the presentation, and I'm here representing a team from across the bank that is working on what we believe is an exciting proposal that is going to be helping to address this infrastructure deficit that we all know very well. With me to do the presentation, we'll do it as a team. We would have a couple of colleagues. First we have Hela Shikuru, and Hela is the Director of Energy and Environment for the bank. And then we have Taz Anvaripur, and Taz is the Head of Infrastructure for the bank. So this is not just a financing issue. There are many other dimensions to it, legal, etc., and all the colleagues are here as well, and we look forward to the dialogue on this. The infrastructure, is the slide working? We had some slides to go with this. One second, I think a slight technical glitch here. There we go. In the interest of time, we'll not dwell on this too much. You all know the story. The gap is huge. The effects are debilitating on GDP growth, on structural transformation that you've been talking about. And a lot is being done, we acknowledge, on the continent by all the developing partners and most importantly by the countries, African countries themselves. Yes, taxes, there are better natural resource management and to use the proceeds to help to address the gap. These are all well and good, and these are all very helpful and should continue. The fact remains, though, that we need to scale up and scale up quickly, because there is an urgency to this, and the urgency is also not lost on all of you, I know. You'd also recall a year ago, African leaders in the Peter Declaration did actually request for innovative mechanisms to address the infrastructure deficit, to accompany the work that has been going on with regard to the identification of projects, of strategically important projects across the continent. So as we celebrate as AU celebrates its 50th anniversary, we believe it's appropriate to have an instrument to help fill this $50 billion gap, hence your Africa 50 fund, which previously, this initiative previously was referred to as the Africa Infrastructure Financing Facility, but that was just a temporary name. So going forward, it's the Africa 50 fund. What is the purpose of the Africa 50 Fund? What is it supposed to do, and what's new about it? It is intended to accelerate the pace of trying to bridge this infrastructure gap. And it is intended to be a very focused, flexible delivery mechanism that targets we believe, the two biggest bottlenecks in the infrastructure value chain. And we're talking about, again, no surprise to all of you, we're talking about project development, and we're talking about project financing. For project development, clearly we are looking at all the work, the pre-feasibility, feasibility studies, all the work that needs to be done to bring projects to bankability. Across the continent, there's a long list of projects, but the money that is required to really bring them to the point of bankability has been lacking. One quick point, this Africa 50 Fund will be focusing on projects that are commercially viable, infrastructure projects that are transformative, commercially viable, bankable. We acknowledge, of course, in the larger scheme of things, there will be many other infrastructure projects that require public funding, but that would obviously be complemented by what this fund does. Very importantly also is the time it takes to get from an idea to operations. And one very important objective of this is also to cut down the time it takes to really, from an idea to operations. The continent, as you all know, and as many comments have been made this afternoon, cannot wait. The need is immediate, and there's hence the need to move very quickly and expeditiously on this. On the project financing side, this is again complementary to the existing tools, the existing financing mechanisms, what the African Development Bank provides, what other development agents provide. But there clearly is a need to scale up. It needs to have more risk mitigation tools and mechanisms. And this fund is intended to help provide that, as well as, where necessary, direct financing in the equity or even debt financing to projects. So what exactly talked about this, the two aspects. And let's move to the big question. The big question now is, and of course, this is a big idea, but how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to fund the African 50 Fund? We propose a tiered equity structure, and I'll camp on this slide for a couple of minutes. We propose a tiered equity structure for the Africa 50 Fund. At the bottom of the tier, it may look a bit awkward. We're talking about ADF and other African countries. Just read it, African countries. Why? We believe very strongly that the money is one thing, but the message that the commitment of the money sends is just as important. And what do I mean by that? The message here being the commitment by putting, as they say, your skin in the game in a significant way. You also send a very strong message about the commitment individually and collectively to help remove the soft but very important bottlenecks to the delivery of infrastructure. So that's the bottom, the first tier. We are going to propose, of course, we'll be having discussions with our board of directors, that the African Development Bank itself, within its existing guidelines for investing in equity, will be investing in the equity of the Africa 50 Fund as well. And then at the top of the pyramid is sovereign wealth funds, pension funds. There have been many discussions about that today, and as well as even central banks, which as a result of the risk mitigation that is provided by the two bottom layers, first and very importantly the African countries themselves, the African Development Bank, the other providers of capital, recalling worldwide you're looking at about $35 trillion worth of just pension funds money. Of course, there's competition for these resources, and we need to provide the right environment to attract such resources to come finance infrastructure on the continent. Everything in that triangle is represented in the equity in the rectangular box. And essentially, with that equity, we've been asked a question when this conversation started. You told us, well, you're going to have an Africa infrastructure bond. Well, it is still in play. The Africa infrastructure bond, I mean, the bond part of it is basically with the equity. Once a rating has been obtained for the fund, then you would be able to issue bonds to help scale up the leverage off of the bonds that have been leverage off of the equity that the fund has. The bonds, currently we are targeting, and this is subject to conversations we'll be having with rating agencies, targeting a single A rating for the Africa 50 Fund. Now, just to give you a sense of what we believe the ambition should be at a minimum, and essentially what this money is going to be used for, I will turn over to my colleague, Hela Shekru, the Director of Energy and Environment, who will tell us when she receives all this money, what she's going to do with the money. Right. So Hela, tell us, what are you going to do? Yes. You need this?
No. Thank you, Charles. So basically, once we are able to go forward and mobilize resources through equity and leverage it up with bonds, what we intend to do is to put this money to work hard. We will make it work hard and fast because our intention is to accelerate the preparation, the development, and the delivery on the ground of key infrastructure projects, transformational, national, but mostly regional infrastructure projects on the continent. Some of these projects have been dreamed of or studied for a long time, and it's time now, with the good momentum we have on the continent, to transform them into a reality. I'm talking about the reality that we have, which is that Guinea, for instance, Guinea-Conakry, is endowed with huge amounts of hydrology, the potential for being a water tower to provide electricity, not only for its own needs, but also for the Mano River areas, the potential that we have in the DRC with the Inga site on the Congo River, which has the potential not only to meet the needs of the Congolese population, but the Central African, the South African, the West African power pool, and East African power pool and beyond, and we can phase it, and it has been moved or taken through a number of stages with the assistance of the African Development Fund up to a point where it is almost ready for bankability. I'm talking about unlocking landlocked countries to extract and transport agro products, minerals, like Burundi, Rwanda, through Tanzania with the Isaka-Kigali extension of railways, enhancing and scaling up very important terrestrial linkages, like the very busy portion of Lagos-Abidjan, which offers very attractive portions of traffic, and beyond all the way to Senegal, and looking there at what portions always can be blended with public and private partnerships, and taking the financing wherever it's appropriate. And finally, in the water sector, helping countries with water scarcity to import water from neighboring countries, like we see the need for replication in the Lesotho Highlands water project exporting into South Africa. These are examples of projects that when we have a vehicle which has this ability to crowd in the significant African and international savings, long-term institutional savings, we can take this core equity that comes from Africa, from the ADF, from the ADB, and leverage it up to deliver these very important projects. And you will see here that we intend for each dollar that is put from the core equity to see on the ground $10 worth of infrastructure investments. This is why we believe that to get us started, $3 billion amount can help us achieve the most immediate projects that are in a fairly advanced stage, and ultimately target a $10 billion of equity that will allow us to deliver on the ground $100 billion worth of projects. How will the Africa 50 Fund operate? This facility will be independent in the way that it is independent legally and financially. It will be, the intention is that it will be flexible. It will be using best practice streamlined processes for commercial operations. It will be targeting to have efficient teams. And we will use best practice governance and capital structure for delivery of the projects on the ground. While it is legally and financially separate from the ADB, the Africa 50 Fund will be an important partner and a close partner of the African Development Bank Group, and vice versa. They will be complementing on each other's work. They will be building an additionality relationship. You know what are the strengths of the African Development Bank window. We know what are the strengths of the African Development Fund window, which is very important with its concessional resources that can go where the commercial money cannot go, but can go also where it can leverage the commercial money. We will be working with the African Development Bank's convening power and very important presence on the ground and sector expertise. And with those basically picture of what our mental image of the fund is, we can see what the reality that our colleague Tas is going to explain to us about the expertise that the African Development Bank Group has accumulated with real delivery on the ground of a few projects across the regions.
Yes. Thank you, Hela. African Development Bank innovating. We would like to talk about a little bit what we have done in the last 5 years since the private sector operations start to speed its operations. In the last 4 years, we decided to get out of our traditional role as a banker and start working with all the parties and take the infrastructure development to a different stage. Today, I would like to present you what we have done in Senegal. In Senegal, between 2009 and 2011, the bank has supported 4 infrastructure projects. The total amount was 1.3 billion euro. The bank put 185 million euro from its own resources and facilitated this incredible infrastructure backbone for the country. Our role was not only the banker. We worked with all the parties, with the government, with investors, with other lenders and development partners to make these projects a success story in less than 2 years. Obviously, it was a hard work. It was a long way. Altogether, we learned and we decided to take this opportunity called integrated infrastructure approach to other countries in Africa. Why those 4 projects? We have chosen those projects together with the government and investors because there are some synergies between those projects. Actually, we started with the airport. When we looked at the airport project, we noted that going from Dakar, from the city center to the new airport location, the amount of the time you have to spend is 4 hours. The country already had a plan for a toll road, and we asked them, why don't we accelerate that? Why don't we start immediately? When the airport is ready, the toll road will be ready as well. Obviously, toll road is serving to a number of purposes, not only the airport. There is a power plant. Senegal doesn't have hydropower resources. Senegal also doesn't have gas resources. And hydropower resources, gas resources are missing. So what will happen? The country is going to stay in dark? No, that's not the answer. We decided to support a coal power project in Senegal. Unfortunately, Senegal doesn't have coal resources as well, and coal needs to come from South Africa. That triggered the expansion of the port project, and which is done today. Out of these 4 projects, 2 of them are already fully operational. Dakar Airport is 80% completed, and the power plant is about to start its construction. Those 4 projects, what was the role of the bank? The bank was not only the lender, co-developer, and the trusted party. Most of the contractual agreements, we sat on the table and we negotiated with all the parties. And we told all the parties around the table what are the best practices. Country is committing itself for the 25 years agreements, they have to honor it. And investors are investing their money in the country, they have to make returns. Today, those 4 projects are altogether showing the much-needed infrastructure backbone in the country. Was that only a national endeavor? It was not, because today, as the bank, we are looking at the Dakar-Bamako Railway. Once the Dakar-Bamako Railway is completed, a landlocked country, Mali, will be benefiting from this infrastructure backbone, specifically from the port and the regional airport. I can testify today that without the bank's involvement, those 4 projects wouldn't happen. And I am sure, Honorable Minister, he will support my statement. Today, we know that this new modality called infrastructure integrated approach will be ready for replication in any country in the continent. In fact, we already have a mini version of it in Burkina Faso. We have another version of it in Nigeria, Kenya, and other countries as well. It is starting, and it will scale up. Let's look at 4 other countries, what was happening around the continent. Kenya-Uganda Railway, opening Uganda, a landlocked country, to Mombasa Port. Another game-changer project in Kenya, 300 megawatt, the largest wind farm in the world, privately owned, the largest wind farm in the world, ready for replication. Low-cost power in Cameroon, Central Africa, 2 projects supported by ADB and ready for replication in other countries. We have done many energy projects, and we would like to escalate those projects to different countries in Africa. Morocco, North Africa. We supported government to use different resources, putting ADB's contribution as a seed and facilitating financing from different resources such as climate fund and making the country's energy diversification a reality. Again, ready for replication. And finally, South Africa. We supported Transnet with a huge loan of 600 million, which will connect transport network of South Africa to the other countries. Again, ready for replication. All those projects, bank's role was not only a lender. We worked with everyone to make those projects happen. And we would like to replicate this everywhere in Africa. Change must come with us, all of us in this room. Thank you.
Thank you, Taz. And Taz has shared with us some examples of transformative projects that have been financed by the African Development Bank. The point here for us is, yes, the bank will continue to do its part and continue to help make reality many other transformative projects on the continent. In addition to such work, there's a need to scale up. And so if you're asking yourself, well, the bank is doing this and why this, there's a need to scale up. There's a need to have this flexible delivery mechanism that is essentially initiated and primarily the core capital financed by the African countries themselves, crowding in, of course, other capital to make it happen. We have before you, you see on the slide, the timetable that takes us to October. Between now and then, or even as I stand here before you, do we have technical issues? Yes, we do. Do we have answers to all of them? No, we don't. But we do have answers to quite a few of them, and for the ones we do not have answers, they are not insuperable. We clearly can find the solutions for them, and we look forward to the conversations with you to be able to work through and to be able to working together get us to the October target date for your commitments to this. The needs are urgent, as many of you have also remarked, and we look forward to your assistance to help break the cycle or the chain of business as usual. I'll end here, and we look forward to your comments, your suggestions, your guidance. Thank you very much, Honorable Governors, for your kind attention.
Thank you, Charles, and obviously your colleagues for that concise presentation and the concept, structure, and expectation from the fund. But obviously what I like the most is the track record you have in infrastructure development in Africa and the potential for replication given the huge infrastructure gap on the continent. But more important, the fact that also it came up in most of the discussion we had on transforming Africa, how infrastructure plays a major role. Now, I think this is a dialogue for the governors. Let me now open the discussion to the floor to get some comment or question from the governors or the other participant in the room so we can get some clarification or even comment on how to sort of improve the concept and the structure and the design of this infrastructure funding. So if you get microphones sort of going around, we can get questions and comment. Yes, here in the front.
Thank you from Mauritius. A fund is welcome, and if it's structured the right way, no doubt people will want to invest. But I think there are some important missing parts which are not being addressed. We have too many project ideas and not enough projects, and the project feasibility studies we've done have been guided by what governments want to do, not by what the market is interested in. I think the bank has started some work on this, but I think a prerequisite for a fund to be useful, we must relook at the work we've been doing on feasibility studies, and I think the bank has started a platform. Perhaps the bank needs to link up what are the projects governments are interested in or the bank itself thinks are worth doing, and then have a search for potential private promoters who are willing to put their money in those projects. That's much along the lines of what Tass said she did in Senegal. I think the toll road came because that was needed to make the airport work. So you're already doing these projects without the fund. I'm not saying you don't do the fund. I'm saying that there's another bottleneck which is more urgent upstream, and we need to change the way we're doing feasibility studies. We need more projects and less ideas. So we need to sort out which ideas can work and which cannot, and it needs to be driven by where there is a private promoter interested to do it. But preparation of projects is a public good. It can't be included in this fund, and it can't be done on commercial terms. So we need to think about what to allocate from ADF or ADB resources to prepare projects. The second related point is projects don't get done, or the feasibility study will say, yes, we could do it, but provided various governments do various things. And if it's a regional project, it's more complex. You need several governments to do things at the same time and coordinate. So the ADB may want to think about policy operations to support infrastructure projects, where there's dedicated and additional funding to fix, especially for regional projects, to fix the regulatory framework required so that the private sector can make these things happen. If you do these two things, then the fund will have value. If you don't do these two things, the fund may have no impact.
Can we get more questions before we act? Yes, Your Excellency, the Minister of Nigeria.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I just want to say, yes, there'll be many questions, but this is an idea and a proposal whose time has come. For a long time, as I said earlier in some other forum, you know, this idea has been, some of us have been thinking also about it and saying, how is it that we're going to break this barrier on infrastructure in the continent? And the point is, we need as many instruments as we can lay our hands on. So there's no one fund or no one idea that is going to cure everything, but we need a series. What is attractive about this is that we as Africans have to start doing our homework and, you know, taking the lead in doing some of these, laying out some of these proposals for ourselves. I think this is feasible. I think we should grasp it as African governors, and we should run with it. There's a lot of liquidity on this continent that needs to be tapped, and yet we've not got a way to adequately tap it to do something like this. And we know that with the type of gap we have of 50 billion, we really need to explore all the ways we can do it. Now, so I think ownership, let's start it. Let's be the ones, you know, who tap our own resources first to show, you know, our other partners that we're capable. You know, we've been sitting for a long time waiting for people to bring resources to do these things. It's time we started doing them for ourselves. That's my strong conviction. I mean, at home in Nigeria, we're trying to do certain things in the same direction to tap our own resources. So that's the first point. The second point is, you know, yes, we need to think through the structuring a little bit more. What our colleague from Mauritius said about the pre-feasibility and feasibility studies, this has always been a problem. So it is something we need to find a solution to, but it's not, you know, it's not something that is not doable. In NEPAD, we had a feasibility fund that was partly funded by the ADB, but it wasn't big enough. Now we need to say what is the size we need to tackle the first few projects and try to put that together, you know, and use an instrument, whether it's from ADF or from other sources to do it. But those two things should go in parallel. Right. The third point is you need to find, as was said, bankable projects. And we know they exist because for a long time we've been working, I mean, there's a list of these projects that the continent has put together. But we've never moved because we didn't take it the next step. So I think you need to flesh out from each region. You know, people are going to say, oh, countries, what is in this for me? So for regional projects, we really need to find the critical ones that will speak to the constraints that countries face so that they'll see the utility in having this and also the bankability of it. And we know there are 3 or 4 or 5 projects out there off the bat that are bankable, but they need to be worked on. So that. Third point is on the policies. Yes, it is important that when this is put together, you know, we look at the policy environment for each, if it's a regional project that we want to accomplish. Within a country is easier, but for regional, we have to do that. But it seems to me, listening to some of our leaders, presidents and prime ministers, as well as the ministers of finance, that the appetite, the knowledge, the time is now. People are beginning to see that if we don't take these policies seriously and put them in place or do away with the stumbling blocks, we won't move. So there's a kind of momentum now that I think we need to seize on. And that's why I think that this fund is important. We need to run with it. We need to solve the problems along the way and answer the many questions that are bound to come. But I think the time is now. Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple of questions. We just get one more intervention, then we'll go ask the panelists to address these questions. Go ahead.
Let me say that Austria acknowledges the infrastructure gap on the African continent and the huge challenges that are rising with it. We are curious to know more about it and the commercially viable projects and under this facility. We think that attracting money from private investors and thus leveraging public money is more than welcome. But with regard to the tapping of ADF resources that still have to be replenished this year later, we hope that this will not undermine Africa's ability to continue direct infrastructure financings. Thank you.
So lots of questions for our panelists. Obviously, the importance of project preparation. Second, the type of policies that you put in place to support the fund. And third, the issue about the time is now. There's excess liquidity that could be tapped. And the fourth point, obviously, the fact that there will still be some design issue, but this issue can be addressed as we go along and trying to sort of beef up support for the fund. And last but not least, there are lots of bankable projects in Africa. One has to just find them. And they exist in our region and make sure that these projects will be the focus initially for the fund as opposed to waiting for everything to be perfect to address the infrastructure gap, which has been widely recognized by many African leaders. So, panel, you have lots of questions to address. Charles, with you.
Okay, thank you, Sheikh. I will kick off, and my colleagues will chime in as well. First, we would like to thank the honorable governors that have spoken for what we believe are very encouraging words, and that would make us work even harder on this fund. We agree completely with I think Mr. Mansour, your point about the early stage financing, all the things that happen at the front end. Absolutely, and this is we went through the slides rather quickly, but this has two components: the project development, so all the early stage financing aspects, and of course the project finance. And clearly, there needs to be money. It's a different kind of money, and the risks are different, we understand. But that money needs to be there to essentially get the projects to bankability and get them to bankability in a very efficient way. So no disagreement there, and that's well taken into account in the whole thinking about this fund. On regional projects, and I'd link that to, again, the Honorable Minister's Ngozi's comment about the policy reforms, essentially. We'd get even more complex as you talk about regional projects. This is where we believe the African Development Bank, just by virtue of just the nature of the institution, and as Hela, in describing the fund, talked about that very close link. I mean, this will be a separate, legally separate entity, but with a very close link to the African Development Bank, benefiting from all the the facilitation, the deal sourcing, and the discussions with the countries, all of those would be to the benefit of the fund, and we believe that working with the bank and the bank having this this extra tool, this extra vehicle, would help to speed up, accelerate the delivery of regional projects. So we think it's very well positioned, and in addition to the agility that it's going to possess. A number of other comments that we take into account as we move forward, but I will, let's see if I'm skipping something. Turn to my colleagues and see if you wish to add any additional comments to the comments that have been made. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks to the honorable governors for their comments. Indeed, it's all about directing the responsibility along the chain of the sector development to the source of expertise or funding that is most appropriate for it. So when we are talking about the ADF, which is a very powerful vehicle, which we are very much looking forward to a very strong replenishment of it, our governors, and board members, you have always been asking us to direct this concessional window more towards the soft issues, towards affecting institutional and regulatory reforms, towards going into the very early stages of master planning strategies. This is definitely what we can afford to do more of if and when we have an instrument which allows us to also then follow it up by funding the infrastructure that gets ready to be financed. So you would in a way always also free up ADF's capacity to do more of this work, which I agree has to happen in parallel, not in sequential manner, but rather in parallel, because we will be having things happening at the same time. In addition, ADF, of course, will be, with its scarce public resources, looking to do, to answer the question, to do infrastructure. Our strategic priority as African Development Bank Group has been determined with the 10-year strategy that was recently approved. So yes, physical infrastructure to enable socio-economic development will continue to be a priority of the ADF and ADB. And when it comes to the ADF, when you are using public concessional monies, you would direct them to those type of projects that are very difficult to attract commercial monies to. So in a way, like in project finance, you allocate the risk to that who is better suited to bear it. In this case, you would allocate the funding responsibility and the support responsibility to the window or the instrument that is better suited to doing it, rather than using this public money to do projects that would otherwise be commercially funded.
Let me open it up again and get more question or comment from the audience here in front.
Thank you very much. My name is Clever Gatete. I'm the Minister of Finance from Rwanda. One thing that is really puzzling me is that Africa Development Bank has been financing infrastructure in all of our countries. And all the issues that have been mentioned have been going on, the length at which the projects take, but these have been addressed as we go on. So it's not something that new that we are starting. And indeed, we need to accelerate it so that we can solve these problems of implementation very fast. But then we've come to a point where we realize that for us to go to another level of development, infrastructure is very crucial. Infrastructure in our own countries, infrastructure in our regions, infrastructure on the whole continent. For us to be able to trade with each other, to work with each other, to move goods and services. Now, if we all believe in that, we are saying the money that is available now is not enough. And we need to chip in. And you can only chip in with the resources that we all have. Public pension, our reserves, and others. Now, this is not something much to ask for. It is something that we all generate. We are not asking for tax resources. We are asking for the resources, no matter what small contribution that each one can make, at least we can increase the resource basket. Now, with this resource basket, it's not just giving away, it's an investment. Because you take equity. Once it is an investment, it also makes more money for you, but at the same time, it increases the resources that you can leverage for more money to invest in infrastructure specifically. So I think the whole idea, we should accept it as a good idea and just work on the modality of saying, how can we chip in? Right. Other problems can be solved as we move forward. I don't think if we waited to solve every problem before you start, right, we'll never start soon. Absolutely. So I think we need to get going and be able to really address some of the issues as you go and as you learn from experience. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Can we get, from that side, 2 more questions or comments before we ask the panelists? In the back there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the case for the fund can be overstated. I think it's long overdue, and it's a good idea. More so, I think it's a reflection of an Africa that is beginning to take charge of its own affairs, and I think we all agree that the next decades are the decade of the African. But I think that in all these funds, in all these projects, we must learn from our past. I think it's important to learn from our past. One of the things that is so frustrating vis-a-vis the gestation of infrastructural projects is the issue of delays, the issue of plunging into projects without feasibility studies, right, environmental studies, and so forth. How is this fund going to be different from the delays that we've seen associated with other institutions? It's a key question. Another key question which I see is foreseeable is the tension that is going to rise, if not the competition that is going to arise between this fund, the ADF, and traditional bank activities. How are you going to vaccinate that natural competition, if you like, between the proposed fund and the traditional work of the bank and the DF fund? The third question I have, which is very technical, and I don't want technicalities to stand in the way of this issue. You say that this fund will be independent. What exactly does this mean? Independent from where? Who are the owners? Who are the shareholders? What exactly do you mean, by independent? I don't think you mean you want to create an functional independent institution that is going to be so independent as to compete and replicate what the bank is trying to do. So what exactly do you mean by this phrase that you used, right, the phrase of independence? Right. Number 4, and lastly, the roadmap. I think it's a very ambitious roadmap. It's doable, but I think it's very ambitious, and I think you might want to reflect on that. But I think that it's quite an ambitious roadmap. I thank you.
Right. So a couple of questions. Africans should certainly own the infrastructure fund by contributing into it. Second, the fund is long overdue, but what are the lessons that we learned from previous infrastructure transactions, particularly with regard to feasibility studies? And third question is regard to how this fund is going to compete with the traditional infrastructure funding within the bank. And then fourth, what do you mean by independence of the fund? And last but not least, the roadmap sounds very aggressive from that intervention. So the question, lots of questions, Charles, and your colleagues on the table. Charles.
Thank you, and I again thank the honourable ministers for the questions. Actually, I'd rather be accused of being ambitious than being not ambitious enough. So I think we're on the right track. Yes, there's a level of ambition in there, but as you rightly noted, the Honourable Minister, we think it's achievable working together, and we shall spare no efforts to push it forward with your help. The tension, I'll touch on what I think or even before that, let me talk about the independence, perhaps the wrong choice of words. We're talking about a separate legal entity, that the fund will be a separate legal entity. It's a vehicle that is being proposed to be set up that would have a specific focused mission on infrastructure. So this is the point of it. legally separate from the bank, but benefits, as I said, from the link with the bank in terms of deal sourcing, just the facilitation, all the policy work that the bank does, many of the soft but very important issues that many of you have touched on. Of course, the bank will continue to work on these, so there's quite a bit of complementarity between the fund, the Africa 50 Fund, and the bank, or even the African Development Fund for that matter. If I were to use just a few words to describe in terms of what we're looking to get from this, it's as I said earlier, focused. It will add scale to the volume of infrastructure financing. The basic premise being you're setting up something that is, if you accept the crowding in factor of 10 to 1, essentially you are looking to attract that much more money that otherwise would not come in to finance. So it's very important that we are not looking at just the equity that's going into the fund, but very importantly that 10 times of that equity that would come to make infrastructure projects a reality, noting very well all the front-end work, the project preparation work that needs to be done. On that, I will turn to my colleagues, and I know they want to say a few words about the pre-feasibility and just all the very important front-end work to be done. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. On the feasibility studies and environmental social impact assessment, we fully agree with all the comments coming to us. As I earlier mentioned that we work on many infrastructure projects. In fact, if you look at the last 5 years of experience of the African Development Bank in the PPPs and private sector operations in infrastructure, we finance 53 billion euro projects only by putting $5.6 million. Means that we have 10 times of leverage effect. Those projects didn't happen just like project comes to the door and we go to the board approval and the next day we disperse. In most of the projects, we start from day one to work with all our clients and the governments on the feasibility studies and environmental impact assessment. One of the delay in the continent and infrastructure projects come from here. When the projects come to us, most of the time, environmental and impact assessment studies or feasibility studies are not in line with what the banks are looking for. Most of the time, we have to go back and work on those studies. This is causing quite a bit time loss for every single project in the continent. In Senegal case, for example, for the airport, we took a surgical approach. We helped the government to hire environmental social impact assessment consultants. In fact, we developed terms of references which are going to bring those studies into best practice level. That helped quite a bit to the government to cut the time short to bring those studies to the final level which will be acceptable to all the banks, not only African Development Bank. So this fund tends to replicate the same approach in the feasibility studies area or environmental social impact assessment, contractual agreements, in every corner of the project finance. We would like to be involved. We would like to make sure that when the project is ready to go to financing stage, they are in line with all the development finance institutions, at the same time commercial banks' requirements. We tend to pre-qualify number of transaction advisors and make them available to not only to the governments, but also private parties who would like to prepare projects and invest in those projects in the continent. As such, from the beginning, we will be helping both the governments and the private parties to prepare studies that are going to be acceptable to all the financiers and also different products like risk mitigators. I think one of the biggest areas we lose time in the continent is this area. So we tend to attend this from the beginning. Thank you.
Right. I think.
In terms of the concern about whether the Africa 50 Fund would be crowding out the African Development Bank group windows, actually the reality that we live is just the opposite. Every day what we have to do is to basically prioritize very severely, but also turn down opportunities because of the fact that we need to reach the scale needed. There are a number of projects that require greater number of players on the market. We continue and we will continue to look for every way to leverage, to welcome other investors on the continent, to welcome bilaterals, multilaterals, private. Everybody should scale up their investment in infrastructure in Africa. This is the message, because what exists right now is not sufficient. If you just take the example of energy, please read the chapter by the International Energy Agency, produced in 2011, about what it will take to achieve energy for all. And they prove it very clearly in the numbers that the pace at which we are delivering investments in the energy sector in Africa is not working and will not work. We are not only standing where we are, we're probably losing ground because our population is growing fast, we are urbanizing, and the needs are growing, and our investment at the pace that they are going, at the pace that MDBs are providing and other sources, will not cut it, will not deliver it. So we actually need every possible channel that can act as a conduit, where basically we have all these savings on the continent and abroad that are earning almost no yield right now. On the other hand, you have so many good projects that need to be brought forward and financed, but we need a credible and creditworthy conduit. And this is why, as the Vice President for Finance elaborated, the target is for this vehicle to have a single A rating ultimately. So this is why it has to be separate. It cannot be mingled with the other pools of resources of the bank, which have their own rules and proper, each one will have its appropriate risk mitigation, risk management framework. When you are AAA, you manage your risk differently from when you are a single A, and then it determines how much of risk appetite you have to take exposure.
Right. I'm mindful that we don't have a lot of time left. There's a session coming up at 6 o'clock. And I'm sure we can go on the whole afternoon and give the importance of infrastructure. But let me just briefly just mention a couple of key takeaways from our discussion we're having. One, there seems to be a sort of a general consensus about the importance of infrastructure. A lot of people have mentioned the fact that it's long overdue and this needs to be addressed to make African economies sort of more competitive, as has been talked about in the different group we had earlier. I think second, everybody recognizes that there are always going to be some design issues, and we can't afford, given the challenges, to wait till all these issues have been addressed to start taking some action. So therefore, it all has to be done at the same time while the fund is looking at being put in place. I think third, there's a very strong message about we're not starting from scratch, there are lessons to be learned. And I think when we listen to the track record of the African Development Bank, there are lots of lessons, and good ones and bad ones, that need to be learned to make sure that these issues are taken into account in the design process. I think two areas have been highlighted as key areas to learn from is the importance of project preparation. You don't want to mobilize a lot of money and have no project to invest in. And then second issue that needs to be taken into account is the fact that how do you leverage the bank's access to policymakers in these African countries to address a policy concern as a way of actually beefing up the bankability of this project and addressing risk in some cases. I think the other message that came up came from the Minister of Finance of Nigeria. I think everybody has now a consensus that there are bankable projects that exist in Africa, and we don't need to look very far to find them. In some cases, there may be some need to provide some money to make this more bankable, but they do exist from across Africa, and we just have to go and look for them. I think the message about ownership came up very strong. Although African governments are confronted with limited resources, I think for the sake of owning this fund, it's important that each of us will contribute to the fund to make sure that from the get-go, the Africans have demonstrated a sense of ownership. I think there's a very strong message that came out about the balance between the traditional infrastructure funding of the bank as opposed to the funding from the fund. And I always see that as a difference between infrastructure funding and infrastructure finance. Because eventually, I'm assuming that the fund will look at commercially viable project as opposed to the traditional funding of the bank, which I'm sure will continue regardless of the fund. Last but not least, independence obviously does not mean sort of mentally independent from the bank. It just means for risk purposes and legal purposes, it's important when you have a fund like this to make sure the independence is secure from the get-go. So on that note, I'd like you to join me in thanking our panelists for being very clear in terms of what the fund is all about. Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to call the chief economist come forward so we can close the panel. But thank you, Charles. And
Honorable Governors, I thank you for your participation this afternoon. We had a delay, but I think we caught up rather nicely. I suspect you had wonderful discussions in the breakaway sessions. It could have been better, but I was quite encouraged by the quality of the conversation that I have listened to. Certainly, the report back by the 4 panelists was equally illuminating and informative. And finally, the discussion on the fund, I think, has put us on a path to begin to understand what the bank is proposing, the Africa 50 Fund. Hopefully, you will follow through on this, as the governors will convince your government to begin to vote with your money to make this fund move forward. Africa must finance itself, and then we are able to invite others, some of whom are in this room. This session is now closed. Thank you all. Look forward to seeing you at the cultural. There's a lot of culture in Marrakesh, so we look forward to seeing you at the cultural evening this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merci, c'est gentil.
De moi, on s'est vu.
I've been reminded, I must tell you about a very interesting session that's starting here at 7 with President Bongo on Gabon on the illegal wildlife trade at 7 to 8:30, just before the cultural evening event, right here. Thank you very much.